canals of Holborn were formed by tens of thousands of tons of refuse from first the salt industry, which dominated this area, followed by the glass industry. This was the industrial heartland of Holborn. Much of the riverside part of Holborn was taken over by the shipbuilding industry, first by Smith's Dock, which later became John Redhead's West Docks.
My very first memory was going to a ship launch, and it was more an impression than anything else. It was a massive cloud and dust and rust and smells and oil, and it left an impression on me that I guess stayed with me all my life. I was a naval architect by profession and retired from that about 10 years ago.
I started in the Middle Dock in 1959, straight from school, the boys' high school in South Shields, where I wasted my time on sport, and I was a carpenter.
Well, I started in Redhead's Dock when I left school.
I started work at Redhead's in August 1964, 3 weeks after leaving school. I was at the South Shields Grammar Technical School. I'd always wanted to be a draftsman, so I applied to Redhead's and was accepted for a 5-year apprenticeship as an outfit draftsman.
My dad went into the Middle Docks, I think, in the late 40s when it was still privately owned. I think Sir Laurie Edwards owned it then and was there right the way up till he was made redundant in the 80s.
Your grandfather, he worked in Redhead's from the age of 14 until he was 77. Worked there all his life. He had to go into the docks to work because his parents couldn't afford for his education anymore, you know. My mother, she had lots of cleaning jobs, various cleaning jobs and that when we were young, when we were little. Dignitaries that used to come into Redhead's Docks used to admire the dark mahogany staircase and everything, and the panelled walls, and my mother used to say, I admire them, but we've got to keep the blooming things clean, keep them dusted, you know.
He used to hang all the staging in the big centre tanks of the tankers, and like I say, no health and safety, no harnesses, no ropes, just walk along 9-inch planks 70 foot up.
The noise was tremendous. I mean, you couldn't hear yourself speak at one time. I mean, there was no ear protection like there's now. Every squad of riveters, riveting squad, there was about 4 or 5 guys in a riveting squad. The riveter, the holder up, the catcher, the heater. I mean, you can imagine the number of people that was in the yard at the time. As I say, the noise was tremendous, and we just had to live with it. I mean, we were just part and parcel of our day's work.
There was almost 1,000 people working there at the time because I had a lot of orders for building ships, and also the dry docks had a lot of work, almost queuing up to go into the docks for work on them.
Oh, there was British tankers, Shell tankers, Sheaf Line, Coltex. Every tanker you could name used to be in and out of the Middle Dock, as well as cargo boats, molasses carriers, grain carriers. They covered all sorts of ships.
Redhead's built quite a few ships when I was there, and quite a few of them used to return to the dry docks for survey. But one in particular was the Virginia, which belonged to a local shipping company, the Stag Line of North Shields, and they used to bring the ship back to the dry dock for conversion to a cable layer. The ship would then go off to New Zealand and lay cables, power cables from North Island to South Island in New Zealand, and then it would return to the docks about a year later to have all the equipment removed, which would be then stored. And then about a year or so later, whenever the ship got another contract for cabling, it would come back to the dock again, and the equipment would then be put back on the ship again. There was quite a lot of equipment and a lot of work for the dry docks.
People in the market used to know when the ferry was in with the smoke, or they knew when the whalers were in with the smell. It was horrendous. And when you used to get home, you weren't allowed in the house. You had to strip off in the wash house, have a rub down before you were allowed anywhere near the door. I just loved the place. I think everybody did. It was hard work and they were very strict, but it was just a camaraderie. It was just fantastic.
South Shields was becoming a cosmopolitan area, with immigrants arriving from many different countries, and Holborn had people arriving from Ireland, Arabia and Scandinavia.
My great-grandfather was Carl Johan Söderland, who was born in Söderhamn in Sweden in 1855. He came to this country, I believe, in the 1870s. He did try his hand at a number of jobs, such as ship's chandler, mason. He was a butcher at one time. But eventually, I think all these skills came together when he decided to run a boarding house at 67 West Holborn.
For Arab seamen arriving in a strange land with little knowledge of its language and customs, the boarding house was virtually essential for their survival.
The boarding house was run by a boarding house master who was an agent for the seamen and for the shipping companies where he got them employment. Also, the Arab seamen didn't drink, so there was no kind of social life, only the boarding house. They used to go around, have a meal, play dominoes, cards, meet friends, etc.
By the 1930s, houses in the Holborn area were being demolished, and the photographer, James Henry Keightly, was commissioned by the South Shields Public Health Department to document the housing clearances.
I work with an invaluable collection of photographs here at South Tyneside Central Library. And one of the areas that we've been focusing on along the riverside is the Holborn area of South Shields, where conditions have changed considerably. Still a lot of industry, but the housing has changed and industries have changed over time. And we've been looking at particularly of the photographs by Amy Flagg and James Henry Keightly. We secured some funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund to work with the community and volunteers, and they've been helping us to retrieve the photographs from the collection, to scan the photographs, and they've been looking at the images to find out historical information. And from that information that they're compiling, others are actually inputting the information into a database. And then we're liberating the photographs onto the internet so that other people can find out what life was like for people along the riverside.
Somewhere in the mid-90s, someone turned up in the bar with some black bags and asked if I was interested in some old photographs of the docks. So I said yes I was, and I gave him some money and took them off him, and in it was a load of photographs of warships that were repaired during the Second World War. All the photographs have been taken by James Keightly, and they're all actually marked on the back, top secret, not to be published.
In 1937, the Labour councillor for Holborn was Richard Hewitt. In his role as Housing Committee Chairman, he was instrumental in the planning of the new housing in West Holborn, and in one of those houses lived Billy McLean.
My grandfather lived in West Holborn, at the top of the street. It was a two-bedroom day house with a garden and a living room and scullery at the back. He loved his garden when he retired, you know, growing cabbages, leeks, lettuce, you name it. He loved growing vegetables.
I live in Canada now, and moved there in 1962. When I lived in South Shields, I lived in Anderson Street, and that was right opposite Redheads. The most familiar memory is moving from Anderson Street into West Holborn. These were brand new houses, and we moved from Anderson Street, which was a street with single room houses and 4 toilets in the street with a tap at each end. So it was relative luxury moving from there into a house that had a bathroom, had water inside, and a garden.
Just after the war, there was a lot of rehousing done, and they built the Orlet houses in Legate Street. It was just 24 of them, and that was a new development. And my family was rehoused there, my mum and dad, and myself and my brother, and we were the first people to move in there.
We had a gardener, an avid gardener at the end of the street, Bill McLean, who provided vegetables and flowers for a little bit of pocket money, but he had a fabulous garden, and everybody went there, people who lived in the street.
My mum used to send us down on a Sunday morning to Mrs. Bain's house. She lived on West Holborn, had a lovely garden, and she used to send us down to buy a cabbage or a cauliflower for Sunday dinner.
In 1895, South Shields had 152 pubs and hotels, and 33 of them were in Holborn. But one pub which has survived to this day is the Rose and Crown.
We had the opening night on November the 30th, 1983, and the guest people to open it was Terry McDermott and John Miles. It was meant to be Terry McDermott, John Miles and Kevin Keegan, but Kevin Keegan had some sort of contractual difficulties with the breweries at the time, so we ended up with just Terry and John.
I mean, probably during the 90s, it was at its peak with music happening.
A lot of local bands and artists would turn up and actually play for reasonable fees.
I mean, there was a big roots scene then, and I mean, there was all sorts of people played here.
We had Tim Rose play one month, and the following month we had Chip Taylor. I suppose the claim to fame there was that Tim Rose actually wrote Hey Joe, and Chip Taylor wrote Purple Haze, which were Jimi Hendrix's first two big hits in the UK.
I think I've drunk here now since the late 80s, so I'm a bit of an apprentice really, but that's 20 odd years. Great bar, friendly people from all sorts of walks of life drink here.